did you have it? And then I give you? Wonderful. Okay, let's start by quickly talking about the criterion before we really jump into the issues. Now, first, I'd like to say that the criterion still stands in today's debate. We will be looking at everything through the lens of justice. What is unjust in today's world? Now, as we go through, we'll be coming back to that a lot. Let's go ahead and move on to inherency. Now, I'm going to have 4 main inherency points. The first is that of international treaties, specifically the OECD. And the affirmative teams agree. Absolutely, the OECD does restrict the movement of hazardous waste. The problem is, they don't define hazardous waste. The RCRA, the Research, Conservation, and Recovery Act, actually defines what hazardous waste is in America, and they exempt most e-waste. This is from the Virginia Environmental Law Review, 2010. It says, quote, "There are U.S. federal laws regulating hazardous waste, but these laws do not cover the vast majority of e-waste. RCRA establishes federal regulations on treatment, storage, transport, and disposal of hazardous waste. RCRA, however, essentially does not govern the actions of households and small businesses. Because it does not govern the business of the actions of households and small businesses, which is where most of our electronics are found, what we see is that the vast majority of e-waste, as it says, is not classified as hazardous waste. Therefore, it does not fall under this international treaty, and we still have a problem. We're legally exporting a mass amount of e-waste right now. So with that in mind, let's move to our second inherency issue, that companies that companies are beginning to reduce the toxins in their products here. What we'd like to say is, first of all, voluntary standards really do not work. This is all voluntary, and this is from the Boston College School of Law Journal, 2008. It says, quote, "Voluntary performance standards have not been shown to improve environmental performance generally. Most of the studies in this area find that voluntary performance standards are not associated with better environmental performance." So we see, 1, voluntary efforts have not been shown to have success. Next, it is not mutually exclusive with a ban. Sure, it would be wonderful to stop toxins from going in, but the fact is, everything we have right now does have toxins. Most companies are still producing waste with toxins. That needs to stop. We cannot count on some future law, some future voluntary effort stopping it when we have a problem right now. Voluntary effort is not solving for. And that's my third refutation underneath the second inherency point. This is eventual, or you can vote affirmative and have a guaranteed ban. This toxic waste will not go to these developing nations. And so let's move on to her next point, talking about how really countries must accept this waste, and because countries accept it, there's really not a problem here. Well, as we read to you in the 1AC, other governments, foreign governments are trying to stop this waste. China, for example, has laws saying that they will not import foreign waste, but as our solvency card read, they cannot stop us at this point because we are simply importing so much. Their enforcement really doesn't cover that, but they are trying to stop, and therefore that card said a ban is needed. In fact, countries do not want this, and it is harming them. Dr. O. Dada, the director of Nigeria's Department of Pollution Control and Environmental Health, said, is quoted in the Associated Press, June 2008, quote, "There is a need to reduce the export of toxic waste into Africa. It's causing a lot of health problems, environmental problems. The region is wondering why we have to do this when we have our own problems. Obviously, we do not want our problems." Additionally, the Voice of America News said in 2010, quote, "Electronic waste is more than an economical problem. It also affects the health of millions of people who make a living by stripping out the waste dumped in their countries." So what we see is that they are, in fact, dumping it in their countries. It is not wanted. So that amounts to her fourth inherency point, talking about how developing countries need this. And yes, there are some jobs that come with this. There's another problem here, though, and that problem is that this is not an actual solution. It is not an actual solution. Yes, there may be some jobs. We'd like to refer you back to harm 3, the developing nations crippled. Developing nations crippled. Ultimately, what we're saying is that we have a few temporary jobs now, but those temporary jobs come at a high cost. A health cost, so we're giving you a job, but we're also giving you cancer, and a cost for your entire nation. Really, it's just keeping the entire nation in the developing state. They're not able to become a developed nation, which would have more job opportunities. Essentially, by allowing the e-waste trade and having those few temporary jobs, what we're doing is putting a band-aid on a gaping wound. In fact, this is not a solution, it is exploitation. This is from the Seattle Journal for Social Justice, 2009. It says, quote, "E-waste trade is not a positive trade based on competitive advantage. Rather, it is an unjust exploitation of developing countries' weak capacity for environmental and occupational regulations." Essentially, the impact here is that e-waste is not a positive or beneficial trade for developing countries. It costs them their health and it is a temporary solution whenever we are still crippling their entire nation. It is not a solution. With that in mind, let's go ahead and address harm one and advantage one together. Talking about justice, first of all, I said no because they're not forced to accept it, they're actively accepting it, but as we've showed you already, their governments are trying to stop it. The people are wondering why they have to deal with our mess. So what we see is that advantage one, they say that this is not really harming justice because these people are accepting it. Actually, no, according to our definition, it's not about consent. What we're seeing is that the definition of justice says, are they able, is it their due? Ultimately, what we're saying here is that it is not their due. Really, what we're doing is taking the fact that they're economically and they're fortunate, it is weak, and we are taking advantage of that, exploiting it, taking our toxic mess, which is our responsibility, we created it, they never created it, and saying, we don't want this, you deal with it. As we saw in the 1AC, they have neither the capacity or ability to handle this waste, and they are generally ignorant of this problem. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and move on to the solvency points. First of all, talking about solvency point one, talking about how we had no specific card under customs. Let's bring it up really quickly. From the Governmental Accountability Office, 2008, it says, quote, because customs enforces policies, directives, and regulations of other agencies, if the EPA were to designate used electronics as hazardous waste, and tariff codes were developed to describe such shipments, customs could give additional scrutiny to outgoing shipments of used electronic products. So hopefully that kind of clarifies that mandate. That's what we're doing there. And next solvency point, talking about how the United States cannot handle the e-waste, have three responses. First of all, we can do it better than developing nations. As read in the 1AC, they do not have the infrastructure. We see ultimately under the health harm that is going into the soil and going into the groundwater. They simply do not have the infrastructure. We're a developed nation. We do have regulations already governing pollution. We have a much better chance of recycling this better than they would. Next is an industry opportunity. As we read in Harm 4, which was not refuted, we lose an opportunity to create a whole new industry in America, to add many, many jobs, to really help our own economy by establishing a recycling industry here. But the third and biggest response here is that we are not recycling. We're not mandating recycling. There are also landfills in America that can take the e-waste, and e-waste in landfills present no health risk. This is from Dana Joel Gasco, the Director of Projects and Issue Management for Environment and Regulatory Affairs with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. In April 2005, who says, quote, there is no scientific evidence that e-waste in landfills presents health risks. Landfills are built today with thick, puncture-resistant linings that keep waste from coming into contact with soil and groundwater. So we see landfills here are much better than landfills there. So ultimately, what we've seen today is, first of all, the criterion stands. We are doing them an injustice by burdening them with our mess. We are still exporting. We have a large amount exported because we do not, this does not fall under hazardous waste. Companies are doing this voluntarily. Countries do not accept it. And finally, we do solve, and we do have the advantage with our plan of upholding justice. And for all these reasons, we must pass this. Thank you. I now stand ready for cross-examination.